Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today is my first video in my series looking at each of the Formula E teams and looking at how they did through Season 9, the first year in the Gen 3 era. So for this first video, I have the bottom three teams in the Teams Championship at Mahindra and NIO in kind of reverse order from 10th through 11th through 9th. And I just wanted to take a look at each of their teams and specifically the drivers and talk a little bit about how I thought their years went. So starting at Abt, of course, their two main drivers were Nico Müller and Robin Frijns. Of course, Kelvin van der Linde did step in for rounds 2 through 5 to drive for the team when Frijns had his broken wrist. Of course, one of those races, neither Abt nor Mahindra drove the Cape Town E-Prix. Because of a technical issue with the car that made it unsafe to drive, but very small sample size, so I haven't really included it in the board. So Müller 15 points, Frijns 16 points. In the race head-to-head where both cars finished, which was much rarer than I thought it was, 3-2 advantage for Müller. In terms of average finish position, 10.6 for Müller and 13.4 for Frijns, so a bit of an advantage there for Müller. Quality head-to-head wasn't particularly close, 10-2 in terms in favor of Müller. In terms of qualifying gap, the delta was 0.221 in favor of Müller throughout the season. And just kind of taking a quick look at where I had them ranked on my power rankings on average this season, just for something fun. Müller was ranked 9.3 on average, whereas Frijns was 13.3. So I think clearly looking at all the data here, I think Müller had a much better year than Frijns, which was, I think, a bit of a surprise. I think coming into this year, I think people knew it was going to be a bit of a struggle, as Abt was a new team in Formula E. But that being said, Frijns had been very good at his time at Virgin/Envision, and I did expect Frijns to have the better of Müller coming into this year. I definitely think the wrist injury didn't help when he came back. And it probably held him back a little bit, especially those first couple races. And by that point, Müller would have had a lot more experience with the Gen 3 car. But that being said, they did make some good progress through the year, and I think probably the second half of the year, they were probably a little bit better than their works team, Mahindra. Now, just looking at the team, obviously, they're a brand new team, so they have no real history prior to this year. Of course, in the early days of Formula E, Gen 1, I think the first 3 years of Gen 1, they did have a Formula E team in collaboration with Audi, and then Season 4 onwards until when Audi left the sport, the team was basically controlled by and run by Audi. But of course this year, 21 points total, 11th in the Constructors' Championship, which is honestly one of the best points hauls that the last place team in Formula E has ever had. So that being said, I think a good learning season. I do think that next year they would be expected to take a nice step forward. Now next, moving on to their works team, Mahindra. I think a pretty disastrous year by their standards. I think that they probably came in with some decent expectations with the new powertrain, with everything being brand new. And I think that unfortunately for them, they came out and produced almost the slowest powertrain this year. So taking a look at their two pairing of drivers, they had three drivers this year. Lucas di Grassi, Oliver Rowland, and Roberto Merhi. Because di Grassi and Merhi had enough races together, I'll look at each pairing separately. So for di Grassi and Rowland, 18 points for di Grassi, 9 points for Rowland. Of course, for di Grassi, 8-15, actually all of those points, came at the Mexico City E-Prix, where he got pole and came third on the podium, which in hindsight is absolutely crazy result. But I think, it was first race, a lot of teams didn't really have any idea what to expect with setup, with energy management. And of course, Mexico City is a track that di Grassi is exceptionally good at. It's won there twice. So 9 points for Rowland in race head-to-head, 4-2 advantage for di Grassi, where both drivers finished. Average finish position, 11.6, 12 for di Grassi, and 12.7 for Rowland. So a bit of an advantage there for di Grassi. In qualifying though, Rowland had the advantage 5-3, but the overall qualifying delta was 0.061 in favor of di Grassi, although I did have to remove one race because I think Roland qualified Degrassi by like 11 seconds. So that being said, the average is probably skewed a little bit towards Degrassi's favor, removing that one race. For my average power rankings, 15th for Degrassi and 16.1 for Roland. So I did think that Degrassi was a little bit better than Roland, of course, over the course of their time as teammates together. I think the power rankings are probably a little low because we didn't really know what to expect from Mahindra going into the year. I think because they started so well, I think those successive races where things went really, really badly, I think probably was more of us thinking, oh, the drivers are making mistakes, they're not delivering the potential, and less of Mexico City being an absolute freak race. Now looking at their recent history, 2020, 49 points, 9th in the championship, not a great year for them. 2021, the absolute bonkers crazy year, 132 points and 9th in the championship. I think for reference, 132 points this year would have had them, that would have had them 7th in the championship this year. Of course, the crazy qualifying format that they had these years definitely helped kind of bloat their points total. But that being said, still got 132 points. 2022, 46 points and 8th place. And that, of course, is last year in the Gen 2 era. And then this year, 41 points, only 5 less, but they've dropped 2 places in the constructors to 10th. So that being said, yeah, not a great year. And I think similar to Apt, they will be looking for a bounce back year next year. I think that being said, though, because these two teams are going to be tied to each other, assuming that Apt's using Mahindra powertrains again next year, I think Apt do have a bit more potential to improve, given that they started brand new and they were so far off the pace at the start of the year and they progressed through the year. So I honestly wouldn't be surprised if next year, if Apt actually finished ahead of Mahindra in the team's championship, just based on how things have looked operationally for Mahindra the last several years. Now, last team in today's video, NIO. Of course, their two drivers, Dan Tictum and Sergio Seti Camara. 28 points for Tictum and 14 for Sergio. Race head-to-head, 8-3 in favor of Tictum. Average finishing position, 11-1 for Tictum, 13.9 for Seti Camara. So Tictum quite far ahead there. Qualifying head-to-head, 13-3 for Tictum, with an average qualifying gap of 0.297 for Tictum. I just realized I hadn't even talked about Degrassi and Mary, so we'll take a small pause for NIO and go back to that. So of course, Roland left Mahindra mid-season, 14 points for him, for Degrassi as their time of teammates there, and Mary, who was basically brought in as a mid-season replacement, very low expectations, no points. Race head-to-head 4-0, average finishing position 12 for Degrassi, 16.6 for Mary. Qualifying head-to-head 7-0 for Degrassi, with an average qualifying gap of 0.741. On my power rankings, 12.5 for Degrassi and 21.5 for Mary. So absolute slaughter by Degrassi against Mary, and I would honestly be very surprised if Degrassi or if Mary was brought back next year. So anyway, going back to NIO after a short break there, that 0.297 qualifying gap is the second highest on the board, of course, behind Degrassi and Mary, fairly big. And Tictum did have a pretty good year, I thought, and was much better than Sergio Seti Camara. Of course, that kind of performance would normally warrant a promotion to a better team, but everyone knows Tictum's history, his fairly a colorful personality as well. So I do think teams are quite hesitant to sign him, despite the fact that he's generally proved to be a pretty good driver. In fact, I had him 9.2 on my power rankings. Generally did show that he's like an above average driver, I think, at minimum. Now looking at NIO, recent history, 2022, absolutely awful season, 0 points, 12th in the constructors, or in the team's championship. 2021, 19 points, 12th in the team's championship. 2022, of course, that 19 points was helped by the crazy format that year. 2022, 7 points, kind of fell off quite a bit last year. 10th in the championship, but were better than Dragon, who were an absolute disaster last year. 2023, 34 points, their best season, I think, since season 4, so last year of the Gen 1 era. and they finished 9th in the championship. So that being said, I think NIO will be quite happy with how this year went. Of course, the trick is going to be keeping that success going and continuing that form into Season 10, the second year of the Gen 2 era. We've seen in Formula 1, a team can come out of the gates really well with the new regulations, and then as those regulations mature and other teams progress and develop their cars and their powertrains and their engines, those teams that maybe are a bit of a surprise generally tend to fall down the order. So that's definitely something to watch out for NIO. I would not be surprised if they're 11th in the team's championship next year, given that I don't know how much of a budget they have. They don't really have the biggest budget historically, and I would be very surprised if they moved up as well. So that's really my look at the bottom 3 teams from Formula E for Season 9, and talking a little bit about how their seasons went. So of course I'll be doing this for all the teams. Quite remarkably, all the teams in the top 8 teams basically all finished in pairs with customer team, works team, customer team, works team. So because I'll be doing 2 teams for each video, this is the only one with 3, it'll be a good chance to compare the works and customer teams in each case as well. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.